Stop! I know that the last thing that you want to be hearing right now is somebody sat in their living room telling you to not have that glass of wine. And I promise you that is not what I am going to do. Join me for no more than 10 minutes while I talk to you just about becoming slightly more conscious about what you're drinking during this really challenging time. Fab, you stayed. Thank you. My name is Charlotte Hopkins, and I've been working with professionals who use drugs and alcohol for over 20 years, and I absolutely get it. I get that you've probably come home from one of the scariest shifts that you've ever had, knowing that you probably have to go back in for another really scary shift tomorrow or in the next day. I absolutely understand that there's the high pressure, you're exhausted, you've got anxiety that you've never experienced before, you're stressed, you're nervous, probably confused about how we even find ourselves here. You've had to deal with patients and peers and colleagues who've probably really tested your patience. And all you really want to do is to relax, de-stress and sleep probably. So over the past few weeks, I've spoken to several support staff and people on the front line, people who are relying really heavily on alcohol or other substances like codeine, opiates, Valium, cocaine, etc. People who are really relying on that substance to cope and to really be able to manage their emotions at this really incredibly stressful time. And I know that there's probably some of you listening in, if you've listened this far, that are probably thinking you're using this as a coping strategy in exactly the same way. And I just wanted to remind you really, really gently that it's such an easy habit to slip into. See, the brain is really clever. The dopamine that gets released will kind of con you into thinking that using substances is the only way that you're going to be able to sleep, to relax or de-stress. That craving is able to, really create this black and white thinking that will stop us seeing the kind of logic and reason during really challenging times. So whilst I really understand that often it's a really quick fix, and I get it, I get that it works at that time. It's a really great way of dealing with difficult situations, emotions and struggles. But actually, it can often bring additional difficult emotions such as feelings of guilt or shame, or bring behaviours such as secrecy. So whilst I'm not here, and I'm most definitely not here to tell you to stop, that is not what I'm here to do and it is not my job, but I do want to call out to you to become really more mindful and conscious about what you're using, especially over the next few weeks. Because ultimately, when you do become more conscious and you are really thinking about what and how much you're using, we can really help to keep ourselves healthy, strong and safe. I'm hoping that you've stayed with me so far. Great. So let's think about some of the things that you might need to think about. Some of the early signs that might point out, or there might be some signs that there's an increase in your use. The first one to really think about is, do you find that you're making excuses for your use? So saying things like, it's only tonight, I won't use tomorrow, it'll just be for the next few weeks to help me through. I know that I need to keep going. So if I use this substance, it will help me. It'll only be temporarily. Often people who find themselves in a position of compulsive use or dependence or addiction, one of the things they might find is that it was a very slow, gradual release. And they often will say things that they, exactly as I've just suggested, things that will give them the excuses and the kind of permission to use. So just really keep a check on, are you saying those kind of things in your head? Are you really noticing that you're using terminology and sentences that you maybe wouldn't normally use? Number 2 is about denying the reality of how much you're using. I think often people really underestimate how much that they're consuming. And at the moment, you are in the house, out the house. When you get in the house, you're probably not in a position to be able to just sit down and do nothing. You're probably thinking, I have to go and do a food shop. You might need to even be thinking about cleaning the house. Who thinks about cleaning a house in times like this? But you might be one of those people. You might also have the kids to think about, homeschooling. You might think of your next shift, the washing, you have to wash uniform. There's all these things that are going on. So often for people, they may really underestimate the volume of alcohol or substance that they're consuming. And often what happens is we start to remember our use through rose-tinted glasses. We start to forget the hangover. We start to forget how we felt the next day. We start to forget that we drank the day before. We start to, really remember just the positives of that short, sharp intervention, that short coping strategy. So I'm really urging you to really think about what the long-term impact. Remember that hangover is my top tip. Number 4 is all about signs where we might be ignoring our physical or emotional needs. And right now, I absolutely expect and would anticipate that there are so many of you who just want to get home and forget that shift. You want to be able to eradicate that anxiety, that worry, that constant stress that is there. But it's really important that we accept and be with those emotions, because what we don't want is to trap them inside, because that long-term impact on your health is likely to be far more damaging than the situation we're in at the moment, potentially for many of us. But also those physical needs often get ignored. It's really easy for us to consume those calories through the bottle of wine or the few bottles of beer. So we kind of feel full. We need to really make sure we're getting those nutrients inside us before we start to drink, because we need to not forget that we need that food for energy. Now, this is slightly more serious, but if you're starting to get cravings, then your brain is probably starting that process of sabotaging you. It's starting to tell you that you need to have that substance within your system to be able to function. And I think that takes a little bit more exploration. So I would really urge you, if you're starting to identify cravings or you're starting to see withdrawal symptoms, that you really are open and honest with yourself about that, and you're able to just get some support. And I absolutely get it. I've worked with probably hundreds of professionals who work within the helping industry who don't want to acknowledge that. But it's really important that we do, because we need to be able to look at that more preventative harm rather than deal with that crisis, which will ultimately come and bite you on the bum. I promise it happens. So the last thing I want you to just really consider is, are you starting to use other substances? Are you putting yourself into additional risk? If you're using more frequently, or you're using larger amounts, or you're maybe using a stronger dose, or if you're starting to find you're having to use other substances to help you function. So what do I mean by that is, you might have a bottle or two of wine the night before, but then in the morning, if you need other substances to help you through your shift, whether that's a codeine for pain relief, whether that's Valium to kind of numb the anxiety, or even for some people, stimulants, cocaine, that kind of thing to keep you and give you that energy, it might be time to start really reflecting on, am I being particularly mindful around my substance use? And alcohol and substance misuse is never about the substance. It's always about the absence of self and that numbing and dampening down of really tough emotions. So I'm just asking you to really be conscious and consider the harm that potentially you might be causing in the long term during this really challenging time. So I promised you I wouldn't go any more than 10 minutes. So I have a minute left just to talk through some harm reduction techniques. So the first one is really obvious. Buy less. If you buy less, you use less. Number 2, eat and drink, obviously non-alcoholic fluids, but make sure you get those inside you first. Let's get that energy that's not that false energy through your system. Lower the amount that's used. So they can do that in a number of ways. So start later, maybe be rigid with the amounts you've got. If you've only got 2 bottles of beer, make sure you've got 2 bottles of beer and you need to try and stick to it. Make sure you have drug or alcohol-free days. The recommended guidance for alcohol is to have 2 free days. If we mimic that with substances other than alcohol, then it's definitely a good way to look at reducing the harm and impact on your body. And don't underestimate the next day hangover. It will impact your decision making, it will make you feel shit, and it will really kind of put yourself and others in danger. But overall, it's about keeping your sanity, and I absolutely understand that. But if you don't look after yourself right now and look after your health, you're going to be good for nothing. So for those of you who've taken the time to actually sit and listen to me for nearly 10 minutes, thank you so much. Even if you had a drink in your hand, I appreciate you taking that time to listen in and really consider being conscious with your alcohol consumption. Keep safe, keep healthy, and thank you so much for everything that you're doing.